As the Trump regime dominates headlines with shiny objects like invading Greenland, the MAGA Congress is quietly advancing legislation that could disenfranchise millions of eligible American voters, almost guaranteeing that Democrats never win another election again. Now, we've heard that 90 million potential voters chose to sit out the last election, but few people are asking why. And did they really sit it out? Remember, fewer than 50% of voters cast their ballot for Donald Trump, and his margin over Vice President Harris was less than 1.5 percentage points in the end. Hardly a mandate for deconstructing the administrative state. The Republicans' Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or SAVE Act, expected to be taken up in the House next week, would impose new national voter registration requirements, forcing citizens to present a passport or birth certificate every time they register or update their registration after moving. This unprecedented mandate could prevent millions from voting, particularly older Americans, young voters, people of color, and married women who have changed their last name. The Republican House of Representatives passed the SAVE Act last July, but it was blocked by the Democratic Senate and President Joe Biden. More than 21 million eligible voters lack immediate access to these proof of citizenship documents. Many Americans don't own passports, and countless others struggle to locate birth certificates stored away in family homes or bureaucratic offices. Donald Trump even leveraged voter ID as a requirement for California receiving federal assistance for its wildfires last week. Why? Because he knows he could win California in the midterms if voter ID was in place. And that, my friends, is modern-day voter suppression, straight out of Jim Crow, and he knows it works because it helped to get him elected. The law would upend common registration methods like mail-in and online voter registration, overriding the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, and centralizing more power in the federal government, all in the name of election integrity. Despite Republican wolf cry claims that the SAVE Act is necessary to prevent voter fraud, federal and state laws already ensure that only American citizens can vote in elections. The bill's mere introduction reflects a broader effort to suppress voter participation, particularly among certain demographics, namely Black, Brown, and Asian Americans who typically vote for Democrats. Historically, when the federal government intervened in voting rights, it was to expand access through the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act and the abolition of discriminatory practices. Well, the SAVE Act would mark the first time that Washington actively worked to restrict access to the ballot on such a scale. And we saw the effect of this voter suppression in the November 2024 election. Whereas Donald Trump's fake electors scheme back in 2020 failed because it was simply too brazen, with one man, Mike Pence, being the linchpin for its success, this time, instead of overturning the election after it's happened, Trump's stealthy and fragmented plan to suppress the vote has expanded its reach. From Georgia and Governor Brian Kemp, who made significant changes to Georgia's election laws ahead of the 2024 presidential contest in the battleground state, including defining probable causes for removing voters from the rolls when their eligibility is challenged. And turns out anybody can challenge a voter's eligibility. The NAACP of Georgia estimates that by Election Day, the challenges exceeded 200,000 voters in Georgia alone. Now, Republican activists, fueled by debunked theories of a stolen election, claimed they are rooting out duplicate records and removing voters who have died or moved out of state. This bill that Kemp signed into law, SB 189, lists death, evidence of voting or registering in another jurisdiction, a tax exemption indicating a primary residence elsewhere, or a non-residential address as probable causes for removing voters from the rolls. Most controversially, it says the national change of address list can be considered, though not exclusively. Fair Fight Action, a voting rights group founded by former Democratic Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams, slammed the signing of SB 189, calling the measure a voter suppression bill that emboldens right-wing activists in their efforts to kick black and brown voters off the rolls. By signing SB 189 to become law, Brian Kemp delivered a gift to MAGA election deniers, the group said in a statement. Brian Kemp also signed SB 202, which slashed the number of drop boxes by 75%, but only in black-majority counties, and locked them away at night. These moves slashed mail-in and drop-box balloting used by the majority of Democrats in 2020 by nearly 90% in the 2024 race. In 2024, legislatures across the country once again pushed a significant number of laws to change the rules governing voting to disenfranchise likely Democratic voters. In fact, states enacted more restrictive voting laws in 2024 than in almost any year in the last decade. 2024 saw attacks on mail-in voting, which is normal in most civilized democracies around the world, but hated by Republicans as it makes voting easier. Additionally, there were numerous bills that would require documentary proof of citizenship to vote, often a birth certificate, a passport, or naturalization papers. Between January 1st and December 31st last year, at least 10 states enacted 19 restrictive voting laws, including one in North Carolina just after the election. Louisiana alone passed 8 such laws. Overall, lawmakers in at least 40 states considered at least 317 restrictive bills last year. Last year also saw a significant trend of the introduction of bills that would require people registering to vote to provide documentary proof of citizenship, while also allowing for only a small number of document types to satisfy the requirement. This effort seems to be motivated by false conspiracy theories about significant numbers of non-citizens voting in US elections. But why let the facts get in the way of some good old-fashioned prejudice? At least 25 bills in 12 states sought a broader messaging effort to stoke fear and false claims about non-citizen voting, allowing governors and election officials to purge names from voter rolls under the guise of election security. Amongst the new laws, Republican states are restricting assistance for voters who need help filling out or returning an absentee ballot, making it a crime for a person to witness more than one absentee ballot certificate of a voter who is not an immediate family member, and creating more opportunities for absentee ballots to be rejected due to missing information on the ballot certificates or even bad handwriting. And don't forget, it's now a crime in some states to offer water or food to people waiting in line to vote in the hope that they'll be too dehydrated to stay in line. That is voter suppression. And then there's the vigilantes, led by MAGA fanatics True the Vote, who exposed a legal loophole to go looking for, whistleblow and deregister alleged non-citizens on the voting rolls. Except many of the purged names ignored middle names and were purged even if familiar and culturally popular names appeared more than once. These names were American citizens, some with ethnic or racial names that Republicans simply didn't like the sound of. In 2024, True the Vote signed up over 40,000 volunteer vigilantes. By August of last year, they'd already challenged 317,886 voters in dozens of states. By November's election day, True the Vote projected it would have challenged over 2 million voters. According to investigative journalist Greg Palast and his documentary Vigilantes Inc., if all legal voters were allowed to vote, if all legal ballots were counted, Trump would have lost the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And Vice President Kamala Harris would have won the presidency with 286 electoral votes. And if not for the mass purge of voters of color, if not for the mass disqualification of provisional and mail-in ballots, if not for the new mass vigilante challenges in swing states, Harris would have gained at least another 3,565,000 votes, topping Trump's official popular vote tally by 1.2 million. And remember, the polls were close enough that Trump just needed a nudge of voter suppression to clinch the presidency.
You're telling me 2,600 miles away, 2 days for an election, that if I want to vote, all I have to do is show up and prove as an American citizen that I have the right to vote again?
Is this an attempt to remove a lot of Democrats, black people from voting to win the election?
I am far from that, sir, and you have crossed the line.
And today to come out and not be able to vote and no one can give you an explanation, like, it's extremely emotional and it bothers me. It bothers me to my core.
One study done for the United States Civil Rights Commission found that a black person will be 900% more likely to have their mail-in or in-person ballot disqualified than a white voter. In total, 4,776,776 voters were wrongly purged from voter rolls, according to U.S. Elections Assistance Commission data. But because these laws have been enacted at different times, in different states over many months, there's not been any joined-up media coverage of the collective significance of voter suppression upon election results. In fact, if you search the internet for voter suppression surrounding the November election, you will find almost nothing. It's as if the corporate media was purposely looking the other way. Now, I predicted that Kamala Harris would win the election. I, like you, could feel the momentum. And Biden's presidency, though not perfect, had steered us through the pandemic and put the economy on strong footing. When polled nationally, the US is a pretty liberal country. But the archaic electoral college voting system is designed to favor Republican candidates. And Trump exploited that by ramping up voter suppression over many months in swing states. The SAVE Act will roll out this same voter suppression nationally, potentially preventing Democrats from ever winning another general election again. Now we know why Trump let slip that he didn't need your votes.
You got to get out there and you got to watch those voters. You don't have to vote. Don't worry about voting. The voting, we got plenty of votes.
I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.